Hello everybody, welcome to Plain Simple. Today I'm gonna be answering three questions that I received from the comments. One is related to the fuel tank video that I made where I showed a couple of examples of the fuel tanks in two different aircrafts to show the amount of space that there really is inside of an aircraft structure to house the fuel. This particular viewer, I believe his name was MG, he asked about the capacity of the fuel tanks because they looked a little small on the video. One of the tanks looked a little small and one looked a little too big, and he was concerned that he or she, whichever it may be, concerned that that particular fuel tank that was looking a little too big, that it would be too boxy, too squared, and not, it was so big that it would not be aerodynamic. Well, I'm going to address those concerns, those questions. One is the two aircraft in that video, that fuel tank video, the two types of aircraft that I showed were, one was a Challenger 604. If you go back in the video and you see one tank that goes housed in the belly of the aircraft, and it was in the video it was pulled out, it was pulled up, and you could see the cavity of the belly of the aircraft in the fuselage where the fuel tank lives, as well as the fuel tank plucked out of the hole, and you could see the fuel tank itself. That aircraft was a Challenger 604. The second aircraft that I showed was a Global Express, also, which is what this is. This is a page from the maintenance manual for that type of aircraft, a Global Express. Both are made by Bombardier, a Canadian aircraft manufacturer. So there you go. You wanted to know, or that viewer wanted to know, which aircrafts I was showing on the videos, so he could have an idea of what the fuel tanks were, what type of aircraft they fit into. The first one was a Challenger 604. The second one was a Global Express. In the Global Express, I showed a couple of views looking inside of the wing tanks. And he also wanted to know the capacity. Now, the capacity I'm going to show you now is only applies to the Global Express because this is a manual for that aircraft. As far as the Challenger or any other aircraft, who knows? And they're all different depending on range and the shape of the aircraft. But to give you an idea, for the Global Express, which is the one that in the video we looked inside of the wings, the wing tanks, the total capacity for the total fuel capacity for the Global Express is here, 6,365 US gallons. Now, that is not in one single tank. That is in total capacity between the wing tanks and the aft fuel tank. And I'm going to show you where those tanks are at. Looking at a schematic of the Global Express, the wing tanks are, like the name suggests, tanks inside of the wings. They're not so much tanks inside of the wings, they are tanks made up of the wing. The front wing plank, the aft wing plank, and the top and bottom skins, that is what makes up, that is all sealed inside. And that is what makes up the wing tank. So the wing is a fuel tank. It's just shaped like a wing so they can fly. Now, if the other concern, if you in this view here, you have the left wing tank, the right wing tank, and the center wing tank, as well as the aft tank. They're all communicated. They all cross feed from each other, and you can feed fuel from any of them into any of the engines or the IPU or whatever. If you take another concern that the viewer had is the shape of the wing, the shape of the fuel tank, namely the wing, that it would not be aerodynamic. Well, you're thinking of a block of fuel. Let's say this here, this blunt shape of fuel tank plowing through the air, of course it would not be aerodynamic. But if you start with the shape of the tank and you shape the tank like a wing, which is what the wing is, then you're making the tank itself be aerodynamic. Now you may be thinking, well, the front spar of the wing is a flat face. That's not very aerodynamic. Let me show you this view. This is a view that shows the wing box or the center tank. That is also a very squared off section. And indeed, behind the leading edge over here, that would also be a very squared off section. But you add leading edges to fair that shape and turn it into an airfoil. And that's how you end up with a wing in the shape of an airfoil. Now, inside of that, the tank is between the front spar and the rear spar. The tank is all inside here. By the time you add trailing edges and ailerons and flaps and fairings and things on the back and the leading edge in the front, you end up and you create the desired airflow shape. But the top skin and the bottom skin, that is the skin of the wing, the wing tank. That is the fuel tank. The wing itself is a fuel tank, as well as the center tank, which you can see here and here. Here you can see here the center tank, left tank, right tank, and then there's another tank over here. In the case of the Challenger, what the capacity is, who knows? I would have to look it up, but it's enough to make the plane fly for several hours. Anyways, I hope that answers your question, and I hope it sheds a little more light into the whole fuel tank situation and where's all the room for fuel inside aircrafts. Now the next question that I wanted to address is something that this is related to an air conditioning system on aircrafts. I have part 1 and part 2. This is regarding part 2, the air cycle system, and it shows. I've showed in that video the question by another viewer, by this particular viewer, was on top of a mixed manifold. And you can go back and look at that video, so you can see what. So all these names and terms will seem a little more familiar. On top of the mixed manifold, there are 3 black pipes that I neglected to mention what they are. And I'm going to explain what they are on this video. This is what this is. Those 3 black pipes, those are the source of hot air going into the mixed manifold. In that air conditioning video, I explained how bleed air runs the air conditioning packs, which are not pictured here, but there's 2. You would have a right pack here and a left pack here inside of the fuselage. Those air conditioning packs, pneumatic packs, are getting bleed air from the engines and cooling it off to the point of freezing, and feeding that cold air through these 2 valves here, left from the right pack and from the left pack here, into the mixed manifold, and distributing that to 3 zones in the aircraft: the cockpit, forward cabin, and aft cabin. In the video, I explained what the source of the cold air was, but I never explained what the source of hot air was, and how the 2 get mixed together to dial in whatever desired temperature. And that is what those 3 black pipes are. Those 3 black pipes are the source of hot air. You can see here, this here is the source of bleed air from the engine compressors, This is an expanded view of this here. You would have bleed air coming from the right engine, bleed air from the left engine, both being fed directly to here. And it splits off into a three-way manifold, which is right here. This is going through the pressure bulkhead, and it splits off into the three black pipes on the video. These are individual valves that determine the amount of hot air from the engines going into the mixed manifold to each one of the aircraft zones, cockpit and forward cabin and aft cabin. Depending on how much air these valves let through, that's how much hot air you're mixing with the cold air to dial in the temperature at each one of these zones. The correct name for these valves and for this air are trim air valves, and these are the trim air valves, and this would be trim air. Trim air meaning because you're trimming, you're adjusting the temperature of the air-conditioned air in the mixed manifold. So those three black pipes are the source of hot air coming directly from the engine compressors. This is bleed air coming in through here. And this is something I neglected to mention on my air conditioning video. I went on and on explaining what the source of the cold air was and how that system worked. I never mentioned what the source of hot air was to dial in your desired temperature. So I wanted to explain what those black pipes were. Now this leads me to the last question. Oh, by the way, here's in diagram form, in schematic form. This would be the right pack, left pack, getting bleed air, cooling it off, and feeding it into the mixed manifold from both packs. Both feed through the pressure bulkhead into the mixed manifold, into each cabin zone, cockpit, forward and aft cabin. And this is also bleed air, bypassing the packs altogether, so not getting cooled. This is hot bleed air bypassing all this, being fed directly to the mixed manifold. And these are the trim air valves that you can dial. So you can dial in and adjust how much of that hot air is getting mixed in with the cold air from here. And that's how you dial in whatever temperature you want in each zone in the aircraft. Now, the third question that I wanted to answer is something that I also neglected to mention, again from the same air conditioning video, is I mentioned how the air is dehumidified in the process of getting cooled. And a very, very valid question that was brought up is, how does the air get dehumidified? How do you extract the moisture out of the air? And that is done by, this is a diagram, schematic form, or a diagram of the same air conditioning system. Let's see. This would be aircraft forward. The tail of the aircraft is back here somewhere. Aircraft right, aircraft left. So forward is that way. Here you have ram air coming in. This is a scoop on top of the fuselage of the aircraft, in front of the leading edge of the tail, the rudder. This is a ram air coming in and getting split on two wide ducts coming down to each individual air pack here. From there, the air coming in, actually the bleed air, that ram air coming in is cooling off the hot air that's coming from the bleed air from the engines here, from the right engine, from the left engine. Bleed air coming through heat exchangers here, getting cooled by the air coming through the ram air, outside air coming in, blowing through the heat exchangers. And it goes through a couple of cycles of heat exchangers and expansion turbines and blah, blah, blah. And it goes through this whole air cycle machine, which, again, if you want to see more how this works, you can go back and look at the other video. And after all that, the air goes back into the cabin, gets fed into the cabin. In this process here, right here, is a water extractor. The water extractor is, think of it as a centrifugal, like a Dyson vacuum, where you have a centrifuge, where the heavy water gets flung out from the air and it gets collected and it drains out, and the dry air keeps flowing. So cool air goes into here where the water is already condensed because the air has already been cooled partially on its way to get cold, to get cooled even further, but you remove the water here before it has a chance to freeze. So you cool it here to the point of condensing, you spin it in a centrifuge over here and drain the water out while the dry air continues on its way to get further cooled, eventually making its way to the cabin. This water, this is where it gets separated here. This is where the air gets, the moisture gets extracted and it gets drained out. So this is where the air is dehumidified, right here. It's dried up. Now that water gets plumbed and sprayed on the heat exchangers here to further aid in cooling of this bleed air coming through. That water coming from the water extractors gets used up and sprayed on top of and through the heat exchangers. Eventually that makes its way out and gets dumped overboard. But that water that's collected from the air gets used to further cool, to aid in the cooling of the air, bleed air here through the heat exchangers. There you go. I hope I've answered those questions. It's pretty simple. It's very ingenious. The working principles behind all these things are none of them are very complicated. They're very simple once you understand them, but they're very ingenious in how you get to use simple principles of physics, of nature, to drive a desired effect. Nothing but spinning bits of metal and hot air coming in, all powered by burning fuel, and spin them through turbines and heat exchangers, and you end up with freezing air over here. And you're reusing the same water that you're extracting over here to further aid in the cooling. This is all fascinating, to me at least, and to you if you've made it this far into the video. Anyways, I hope I've answered those questions clearly enough. If not, let me know in the comments and I'll try again. I'll try my best to answer any questions that come my way. It may take me a while. This is, I'm not a full-time YouTuber by any stretch of the imaginations. I do have a full-time job. This is a hobby. So it may take me a while to answer your questions, but be patient and eventually I'll get to it. But anyways, I know I've already said it, but I hope I answered your questions. I hope you found it interesting. And stay safe and see you guys next time.